The joy was so immense it felt like it was physically holding my heart together, preventing it from bursting out of my chest. 9. 9 tiny, perfect, healthy baby girls. Their cries were a symphony, the most beautiful music I had ever heard. After months of fear, of high-risk appointments, of a body stretched to its absolute limits, they were here. They were real. I lay back against the hospital pillows, exhausted but soaring, my gaze fixed on the row of incubators that held my entire world. I turned to share this impossible, miraculous moment with my husband, David, a smile already forming on my lips, but the space beside me was empty. NTHE chair he had been sitting in for hours was vacant. His jacket was gone. The half-empty cup of coffee he'd been nursing had been thrown in the trash. A nurse came over to check my vitals, her expression carefully neutral. "Where's David?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Did he go to call our parents?" "He'll want to tell them the news." NTHE nurse hesitated, her eyes flicking towards the door for just a second too long. It was a tiny movement, but in the hyper-aware state of a new mother, it was a seismic shift. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into the edges of my joy. He left a little while ago," she said, her voice unnaturally soft. "Left? Left to go where?" I pushed myself up, a sharp pain shooting through my abdomen. Did he say when he'd be back? NSHE wouldn't meet my eyes. "He didn't say anything, honey. He just walked out." NTHE words didn't make sense. Walked out? No, David wouldn't do that. Not now. He was probably just overwhelmed, getting some air. He would be back. He had to come back. But as the minutes turned into an hour, and the hour turned into the cold, lonely stretch of the night, the truth began to settle in my bones. He wasn't coming back. He had seen the 9 daughters I had just risked my life to bring into this world, and he had vanished. No note, no argument, no goodbye. He just disappeared, leaving me alone in a sterile room with our 9 children, and a silence that was louder than any scream. My greatest joy had turned into an empty room, an empty chair, an empty future. He hadn't just left me. He had erased himself from our lives at the exact moment they were supposed to truly begin. NHEY. Everyone, if you're already feeling this, please show some love by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support helps me share these stories. Let's dive into what led to this unbelievable moment. The architect of a dream. David and I were the couple everyone envied. We had a storybook romance, the kind that seemed scripted for a movie. We met in a dusty old library, both reaching for the same book on classical architecture. He was a dreamer, a man who saw poetry in blueprints and symphonies in skylines. His passion was infectious. He wasn't just going to build houses. He was going to build homes, communities, legacies. I was a landscape designer, and our passions intertwined perfectly. He would design the structure, and I would breathe life into the space around it. We were a team, partners in creating beauty from scratch, and our first few years of marriage were idyllic. We poured all our savings into starting our own small firm, Evergreen Designs. He was the architect, I was the designer. We worked tirelessly, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared vision. He was my biggest champion. He'd hold up my sketches and say, "This is it. This is the soul of the project." He celebrated my talent, my mind, my spirit. The love between us felt as solid and enduring as the foundations he designed. NTHE, dream of a family, was always part of our blueprint. But David's dream had very specific dimensions. He came from a long line of men who had passed down the family name like a sacred heirloom. He was the last of his line, and the pressure to have a son was a quiet but constant undercurrent in his life. He spoke of his future son with a reverence that bordered on obsession. He'd talk about teaching him the business, about seeing the David Carter and Sons sign on our office building. I'd laugh and remind him that a daughter could run the business just as well, and he'd smile and say, of course, but a boy, Sarah. A boy would be different. When I got pregnant for the first time, he was overjoyed. The pregnancy was difficult, and it ended with the birth of our beautiful twin girls, Amelia and Charlotte. He was a good father, attentive and loving, but I could see a flicker of disappointment in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. "Double the trouble, double the love," he'd say to our friends, his voice just a little too bright. But at night, he'd quietly say, "The next one will be the boy." I can feel it. The next pregnancy brought another girl, Sophia, then another, Isabella. With each daughter, a small piece of the light in David seemed to dim. He never said a cruel word. He never raised his voice. In many ways, that made it worse. His disappointment wasn't a storm, it was a slow, creeping frost. He started spending more and more time at the office, throwing himself into his work. Our firm was becoming incredibly successful, but the partnership in our marriage was beginning to crack. He stopped asking about my designs, my day. Our conversations became logistical, revolving around schedules and bills. The man who had seen the soul in my sketches now barely seemed to see me at all. When I found out I was pregnant with non-euplets, it was terrifying and miraculous. The doctors called it a medical marvel. David's reaction was strange. It wasn't joy or fear. It was a kind of desperate, feverish optimism. 9 chances, he whispered, his eyes wide. This is it. The universe is finally giving me my son. He became obsessed. He charted my diet, my sleep, my stress levels. He wasn't caring for me. He was managing an investment. I felt less like his wife and more like a high-stakes project he was determined to see succeed. The love that had once been our foundation had been replaced by a desperate gamble, and I was beginning to realize he had wagered everything on a single outcome. The echo in the hallway and THE silence in the hospital room was a physical entity. It pressed in on me, filled the space where David's presence should have been. The nurses moved with a quiet, pitying efficiency, their kindness feeling like a confirmation of my new reality. I was alone. My 4 older daughters came to visit, their faces a mixture of excitement to see their new sisters and confusion at their father's absence. "Where's Daddy?" Amelia, my eldest, asked, her voice small, and I forced a smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff and foreign. "He had to go take care of some urgent work, sweetie. He'll be back soon." And it was the first of many lies I would have to tell. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I was protecting them from a truth I could barely comprehend myself. Their father, the man who had tucked them in and read them stories, had looked at his 9 newborn daughters and decided they were a burden too heavy to bear. NTHE next few days were a blur of feeding schedules, medical checks, and a hollow, aching loneliness. I called David's phone 100 times. It went straight to voicemail every time. I called his parents, his brother, his best friend. They were all shocked. No one had heard from him. He had simply vanished into thin air. When it was time for me and the babies to be discharged, the reality of my situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. How was I going to do this? 13 children, a business to run, a mortgage to pay, and a heart that had been shattered into a million pieces. The nurses helped me get the 9 tiny car seats buckled into the oversized van we had bought just weeks before. As I drove away from the hospital, I looked in the rearview mirror at the sea of tiny faces, and for the first time, I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. NTHE house was cavernously empty. Everything was exactly as we had left it. His clothes were in the closet, his toothbrush was in the bathroom, his favorite coffee mug was on the counter. It was as if he had just stepped out for a moment, but the house knew the truth. It felt cold, devoid of the warmth he used to bring to it. My joy had turned into an empty room, an empty life. NTHAT, night. After I had finally gotten all 13 girls to sleep, I collapsed onto the living room sofa, the silence of the house roaring in my ears. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was in a state of shock, a numb disbelief. I looked around at the life we had built together, the photos on the wall, the furniture we had picked out, the home he had designed. It was all a lie. A beautiful, elaborate lie. In the depths of that despair, a new feeling began to surface. It started as a tiny spark in the cold emptiness of my chest. Anger. It was a clean, hot, clarifying anger. How dare he? How dare he abandon us? How dare he make me feel like our daughters, were a disappointment? He thought he could just walk away and leave me to crumble. He thought I was the fragile artist who couldn't survive without him. He had no idea who I really was. In that moment, I made a vow. I would not just survive. I would thrive. I would take the business he left behind, the life he discarded, and I would build an empire on the ruins of his betrayal. He wanted a legacy? I would build one for him, a legacy of the family he was too cowardly to claim. From blueprints to battle plans in THE, first few months were the hardest of my life. I was operating on sheer adrenaline and caffeine, a ghost haunting the hallways of my own home. The logistics of caring for 9 newborns and 4 young children were staggering. I hired a nanny, then another. I leaned on my parents, who moved in temporarily, their faces etched with worry and a quiet fury on my behalf. NTHE business was on the verge of collapse. Clients were calling, wondering where David was. Projects were stalled. The dream we had built together was crumbling. One morning, after a particularly sleepless night, I walked into our home office and looked at his empty desk. His blueprints were spread out, his pens neatly arranged. It was a shrine to a man who no longer existed. I could have sold the firm. I could have declared bankruptcy and walked away. It would have been the sensible thing to do, but I looked at the name on the door, Evergreen Designs, and my anger hardened into resolve. He was not going to take this from me, too. And I called an emergency meeting with our small team of employees. They expected me to announce we were closing. I walked in, sleep-deprived but resolute, and laid out a new plan. I was taking over. I would be the lead architect, the head designer, the CEO. I saw the doubt in their eyes. I was the wife, the landscape girl. What did I know about running a multi-million-dollar construction firm? I spent the next few weeks living in that office. I taught myself David's architectural software. I studied his notes, his contracts, his bidding strategies. I absorbed every detail of the business. I discovered that he was a brilliant artist, but a sloppy businessman. He was over-leveraged, had underbid on major projects, and was dangerously close to financial ruin. He hadn't just run from his family. He had run from his failures. NMY's first big test was a meeting with our most important client, a developer for a large community project that was halfway finished. He was ready to pull the plug. I walked into that meeting armed with more than just David's old plans. I brought my own. I showed him how my landscape designs could be integrated to create more green space, how we could use more sustainable materials to cut costs without sacrificing quality, how we could create a community, not just a collection of houses. I spoke with a passion and authority that surprised even myself. NHE was skeptical at first, but he saw the fire in my eyes. He saw that I wasn't just trying to save my husband's company, I was trying to build my own. He agreed to give me a chance, one chance. That meeting was the first brick I laid in the foundation of my new life. I walked out of that boardroom not as David Carter's abandoned wife, but as Sarah Carter, the head of Evergreen Designs. The battle had begun. Raising an army in THE, years that followed were a blur of hard work and quiet determination. I didn't just save the firm, I transformed it. I rebranded it, dropping the David Carter legacy and focusing on my own vision of sustainable, community-focused design. My unique approach, combining architecture and landscape into a seamless whole, began to win awards. Evergreen Designs became known, not for one man's ego, but for a woman's holistic vision. I was no longer in David's shadow. I was the one casting it. And at home, I was raising an army. My 13 daughters were growing up in a house filled with love, resilience, and the quiet hum of a mother determined to give them the world. I taught them everything I knew. I taught them about design, about business, about finance. I taught them how to be strong, independent, and to never, ever let anyone make them feel like they are less than. They were my purpose and my motivation. Amelia, my eldest, developed a keen eye for structural engineering. Charlotte discovered a passion for interior design. Sophia had a brilliant mind for marketing, and Isabella a gift for numbers. The little ones grew up on construction sites, wearing tiny hard hats, their laughter echoing in the frames of the homes we were building. They weren't the disappointment their father had seen. They were the future of my company, and I never lied to them about their father. When they were old enough, I told them the truth, simply and without bitterness. I told them he was a man who was not strong enough to handle the love of a big family, a man who was afraid of the incredible power of women. I didn't want them to hate him. I wanted them to see him as a lesson, a cautionary tale about weakness and fear. One day, about 10 years after he had left, I found a box of his old things in the attic. Inside was a leather-bound journal. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. It was filled with his thoughts from the last few months before he left. It detailed his mounting debts, his business failures, and his spiraling panic. But the most chilling part was the final entry, written the day before the girls were born. 9 more mouths to feed, 9 more failures. I can't do it. I can't face them. There's only one way out. A new life, a clean slate. They'll be better off without me. Sarah is strong. She'll figure it out. And H.E. hadn't just abandoned us out of disappointment. He had abandoned us out of cowardice. He had run from his responsibilities like a thief in the night, convincing himself it was for our own good. The last sentence chilled me to the bone. He hadn't just left. He had a plan, a new life, a clean slate. This wasn't just an absence. It was a reinvention. And I suddenly had a terrible feeling that our story wasn't over. And the ghost at the feast, 15 years since he had vanished. Evergreen Designs was more successful than I had ever dreamed. We were a powerhouse in the industry, a firm run by a woman and her brilliant daughters, who were now young women, many of them working alongside me. We were a testament to female strength and resilience. We were happy. Then, I received an invitation. It was for a prestigious International Architecture Awards ceremony in New York City. One of our community projects was a finalist. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for. My older daughters and I flew to New York, excited and proud. NTHE ceremony was a glittering affair, filled with the biggest names in the industry. As they announced the nominees, a picture of the lead architect for each project flashed on the giant screen. When our competitor's project came up, a luxury resort in Costa Rica, a man's face appeared on the screen. My breath caught in my throat. My heart stopped. And it was him. It was David, and H.E. looked older, his hair tinged with gray, but it was unmistakably him. The name on the screen wasn't David Carter. It was Daniel Courtney. He had a new name, a new company, a new life. He was being celebrated, honored, while for 15 years I had been cleaning up the mess he had left behind. The ghost I had buried long ago was standing on the other side of the world, accepting applause. May a cold, calculated fury washed over me, so intense it made my vision swim. He didn't just get to disappear. He didn't get to start over and pretend we never existed. He didn't get to build a new legacy on the ashes of the one he had torched. NMY daughters saw my face. They saw his picture on the screen. The blood drained from their faces. "Mom," Amelia whispered, her hand finding mine. "Is that?" "Yes," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's him." In that moment, my mission changed. It was no longer about survival or success. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming our story. He had vanished without a goodbye. I was about to give him the reunion of a lifetime, and unearthing the truth. NTHE flight back from New York was silent. My daughters and I didn't need to speak. A silent, unified purpose had formed between us. When we got home, we turned my office into a war room. NFOR 15 years. I had focused on building our future. Now, it was time to excavate the past. My daughters, with their modern skills, were a formidable team of investigators. Sophia, my marketing genius, dug into his new identity, Daniel Courtney. She found his company's website, his social media, his press releases. He had crafted a completely new history for himself, one that conveniently began 15 years ago. And Isabella, my numbers whiz, started digging into his finances. She used her skills to trace the money trail from his old, failed company. She discovered he hadn't left with nothing. He had embezzled a significant amount of money from Evergreen Designs before he disappeared, hiding it in an offshore account, the seed money for his new life. He hadn't just abandoned us, he had stolen from us. Nemelia, my engineer, focused on his new projects. She analyzed the blueprints and material specs for his award-winning resort, and she found what she was looking for. He was using the same fraudulent tactics as before, cutting corners, using substandard materials, and bribing officials. He hadn't changed at all. He was just a coward who had gotten better at hiding his crimes. We had him. We had the proof of his embezzlement, his fraud, his identity theft. We had the story of his abandonment. We had everything we need to destroy the new life he had so carefully constructed. And I hired a private investigator to find his current address, his personal details. We learned he had a new wife and a son, a single perfect son, about 5 years old. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. He had abandoned 13 daughters, only to start over and get the one thing he had always wanted. NTHE final piece of the plan was to decide on the venue for his destruction. It couldn't be a quiet lawsuit. It had to be public. It had to be a reckoning. And I knew just the place. He had just been announced as the keynote speaker for the largest architectural conference of the year, a place where he would be surrounded by his peers, at the very pinnacle of his fraudulent success. It was perfect. And the reckoning NTHE day of the conference, I walked into the grand auditorium with my 13 daughters by my side. We were a striking sight, a phalanx of strong, confident women, all with the same determined look in our eyes. We took our seats in the front row. David, or Daniel as he now called himself, walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He looked out at the crowd, his face beaming with pride and success. He started his speech, his voice smooth and charismatic, and then his eyes scanned the front row. He saw me, NFOR a moment. His confident facade crumbled. His voice faltered. He saw me, and then he saw the faces of his daughters, one after another. The girls he hadn't seen in 15 years. The babies he had abandoned. The women they had become. The color drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. 13 of them. NHE stumbled over his words, trying to regain his composure, but it was too late. The audience could feel the shift in the room. Just as he was trying to get back on track, the large screens on either side of the stage, which were supposed to be showing images of his buildings, flickered. NMY daughter Sophia had hacked into the system. Instead of pristine resorts, the screens filled with images of us. A photo of me in the hospital, surrounded by 9 incubators, with an empty chair beside me. Photos of his 13 daughters growing up year after year, at birthdays, graduations, holidays, all without him. Then the screen filled with documents. The proof of his embezzlement, the evidence of his fraud, the birth certificates of his abandoned children next to the falsified passport of Daniel Courtney. Bay collective gasp went through the auditorium. Whispers turned into loud murmurs. David stood on the stage, frozen, exposed, his carefully constructed world shattering in real time before 1,000 witnesses. And I stood up, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone I had arranged to have. "My name is Sarah Carter, and this man," I said, pointing at the shell of a man on the stage, "is my husband, David Carter. He is a thief, a fraud, and a coward who abandoned his 13 daughters the day they were born, and I didn't need to say another word. I turned and, with my daughters at my side, we walked out of the auditorium, leaving him alone on that stage to face the consequences of his choices. His career was over. His new life was over. His lies were over. NWE didn't do it for revenge. We did it for the truth. We did it to reclaim our story. He had tried to erase us, to turn our lives into an empty room. But we had filled that room with love, with success, with unbreakable strength. We didn't need him to complete our family. We were already whole. And his final, public humiliation wasn't his punishment. His punishment was knowing that he had thrown away a legacy of 13 incredible women for a life built on lies, and had been brought down by the very family he was too weak to love.